City of the Apes?
Yes, 2 days ago. What sights did you see? Thing out there, an atomic bomb? God? You don't understand, Mr. Brent. The bomb is a holy weapon of peace. The bomb is a holy weapon of peace.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. It's the 30th of April, 2025. I'm going to start with a brief introductory video from a couple days ago on the PBS NewsHour to try and start addressing the question of where are they taking America. And so in order to find out where they are taking America, we have to take a sample from a lot of different parts of the sewer in order to find out just how bad the water is. And so this is a regular sample from the PBS NewsHour, I think, right at the middle of the pipe that we are trying to understand. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you, Brother Spoon, Christy. I am Katniss is the first in the chat. Well done. We're not going to use PCR as we watch the sewer, but they definitely are. Let's get started. Good to see you, everybody. Good morning from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Today, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. pledged to find out what is driving the country's rise in autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, after a new report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said that rate had continued to climb.
I'm going to fix this really quick, please, if you don't mind. I'm just going to get this all set up. That should do it. Oh no, this one's not focused yet. So see, I always got to do something. When you don't have your own crew, then you need to just do it yourself. See, I'm focusing my own camera with my own long arm. I don't know how he does it. His production is so incredible. Here we go. Anyway, sorry about that.
The prevalence rate in 8-year-olds is now 1 in 31. Shocking. There's an extreme risk for boys. Overall, the risk for boys of getting an autism diagnosis in this country is now 1 in 20.
The CDC said the increase was most likely driven by better screening and diagnosis, which Kennedy rejected. Separately, there are reports that the CDC plans to study a supposed connection between autism and vaccines, despite dozens of studies showing no connection between the two. Ali Rogan digs into the science.
Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has recently delivered contradictory messages on vaccines. In one interview recommending them,
it's one thing to say the measles vaccine is the best way of preventing spread, but it's another thing to then say, and therefore, we suggest that you get the measles vaccine.
We encourage people to get the measles vaccine.
While in another, again raising questions about a link between vaccines and autism that has been thoroughly studied and debunked.
The studies that they did were very, very narrow.
More than 25 years ago, a supposed link between autism.
Think about abbreviating somebody's comments so and then think you were representing them somehow. She thinks she's doing a news report by reading a script where they use like 2-second sound bites from the Secretary of Health and Human Services. That is in and of itself remarkable. I also think that their choice of the particular white woman here is also very remarkable. They either use decrepit old ladies or they use somebody who they clearly know is not. I mean, come on. This is a joke to me. And PBS NewsHour is a particularly macabre joke on our grandchildren because it is actually supported, at least in part, by public funds. And then in addition to that, they get a whole bunch of money from weaponized piles of money that do not have the best interest of our grandchildren at heart at all, that have been aware of the population pyramid problem for decades and are part of the governance structure that is managing that problem. And so where are they taking America if they have allowed the Donald Trump administration to take in and represent with the Health and Human Services Secretary of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Is this all just a random combination of events that none of these people foresaw coming? Or are we on a very, very bad script here, where everybody that believes that there's some patriotic idea behind MAGA or this patriotic idea behind MAHA is actually being fooled by people who know they're doing it, by people who are willing to do it? And what are they doing? It feels to me like they are bringing America to a very particular place, a very particular set of circumstances from a social perspective. They are not trying to build a big top tent of health freedom like they say on one side. They are not trying to follow the science on the other side. It is this very macabre duality of liars that we have become enchanted by, and that if we don't vigilantly fight against it, our children will inherit. And they'll be in a much worse circumstances than we were when we inherited what we inherited from our parents.
And the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine was put forward by British doctor Andrew Wakefield, a gastroenterologist and surgeon who in 1998 authored this study in the Lancet Medical Journal. The study was based on just 12 cases of vaccinated children, but contained no control group, patients who hadn't been vaccinated for comparison, and it relied on parents' memories rather than
no unvaccinated controls. They actually said on PBS NewsHour there were no unvaccinated controls. Like, that is remarkable. They relied on parents' memories. You know, like the memory of Paula Aitken, who, when she remembered that her son did not develop rapid onset in one day, did not happen after any particular shot, and had a very particular traumatic early childhood, a particularly noticeable developmental trajectory, all of which was edited out in child number 4. And yet PBS NewsHour is absolutely happy to connect Robert F. Kennedy Jr. directly to Andrew Wakefield, who pulled the exact same stunt but with a different script in the UK years before with Polly Tommy. The same script that's now, they're still sticking to now, where some people say it's the P in the DTP. Some people say it's the M in the MMR. Some people say it's the aluminum or the thimerosal. This is a particular kind of mercury. Paul Offit's a liar. These people are on a very limited script and they are not getting off of it. And the way that you can see that it is part of the big picture is that PBS NewsHour is unafraid to tell you their names.
official records. It was quickly criticized for its flaws and later revealed that Wakefield hadn't disclosed conflicts of interest, that he was being paid to work on a lawsuit against vaccine companies, and that he had falsified some medical records to support his conclusion.
We were able to show that he'd manipulated it.
But remember, and this is just going to blow your frickin' mind, remember that Paula Aitken told us that at some point in time, Paul Shattuck told her to go to Brian Deere. Brian Deere being the guy that we now think probably just controlled this. That's why they're also saying his name, selling his book on the PBS NewsHour. Now, I just got some interesting shit in the mail the other day that I really hope is down here. Ow, dang it, I forgot about the wire. Where is that? Oh, man, I think it's upstairs on the table. Abe Fearla, if you're watching the show right now, can you bring me the books that were underneath the iPad charging place? If you're listening, I don't know if you're listening. Otherwise, I'm going to have to call her and tell her to get those books down here. Let me just do that quick because that's really interesting, and I want to tie that in now. And I didn't. She's listening. Thank you very much. Yes, all of them are fine. Thank you. Very, very, very much. So in this pile, let me switch over here. In this pile of stuff, I get books in the mail a lot because I told you eBay's. Don't go to eBay. There's nothing there. Got another Newsweek with autism on the cover. This is from 2000, July 2000. Same month as the human genome business that we read yesterday, right? So you can see that these narratives were being, this is before the internet. This is before social media was really big. And so this is still how it was done back then. That's what I'm trying to do, is really understand it and get the real, my hands on this stuff. This is great, isn't it? I'm getting my mailman hates me. He really does. The other day he came with 11 items. I mean, there's textbooks in there. So this molecular biology of a gene, I needed this for one particular passage in it. You can get some textbooks for like $4. So this is cool. So let me keep us on let me keep this on focus here. So Brian Deere is the journalist who apparently exposed Andrew Wakefield. And so here PBS NewsHour is saying that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is promoting ideas that were already debunked, that ideas that come from the charlatan Andrew Wakefield, and that Brian Deere has the goods on Andrew Wakefield. But it's a very limited spectrum of debate being curated by actors. And now, how would I know that Brian Deere is an actor? Number one, because I talked to the mom of child number 4, Paula Aitken, and there is an interview that I did that's on my website and on Twitch and on YouTube, and is about to be promoted by Melissa Watt, the wife of Alan Watt. I'm actually going to do a program with her in June, and she's going to do a program with me in June. We are in touch. There's a book on the table over there that she sent me in a long handwritten letter, and I'm super excited we finally connected. And she's also going to share that video with Paula Aitken because I think it's a really touching interview in the sense of she's it's a genuine interview with a person who has been confused by these people for a long time. And because she's busy with her son and she's just an average woman and an average mom, at some point she was even scared, and she was involved with these UK people. So the UK person that she got in contact with in kind of parallel with talking to Andrew Wakefield was a guy by the name of Paul Shattuck, who told her that he didn't know who Wakefield was. But later she found out that he and Paul Shattuck actually had papers together, not that dissimilar to how Andrew Wakefield and Peter Daszak have had a paper together about measles, which is really strange that nobody talks about. Peter Daszak, Eco Health Alliance lab leak guy. So, who Andrew Huff told Robert Malone on a podcast had joined the CIA. Anyway, Bob Deere, this guy, is now on the PBS NewsHour. Like a few days ago, they're talking about him. They're saying, look at the 2 books that I've written about the doctor that fooled the world. And of course, there are 2 different Skyhorse books. Skyhorse being, on the back of the book, it says Skyhorse Publishing, so you can see it. That's the publishing arm, the publishing mirror of CHD. They have 2 books by Andrew Wakefield, one in 2010 and one in 2012. And so he's got 2 books, The Doctor That Fooled the World. But they're not selling Andrew Wakefield's book. Maybe somebody that was thinking objectively would all check them all out of the library. Ha, ha, ha. So the reason why I'm saying this is because, again, remember, Paula felt like the mother of child number 4 in that Lancet study that they are talking about now in the PBS NewsHour in 2025, that mom thought that this was one network of people, that Brian Deere, Andrew Wakefield, and Paul Shattuck all knew each other and all were kind of, shepherding the cats. Now, I have in my hand the best of Autism Asperger's Digest magazine, because it was cheap on there, and I wanted to see who was writing articles in this thing. Just another one of these. I want to find out which of these magazines is real and who put them all together, because Mark Kulak got really lucky with the Autism File. That this is a magazine that Polly Tommy put out in the UK. There's all kinds of weird people in there, including Judy Mikovits and all this. It was a gold mine. So if you haven't seen those, check that out on his website. So here, there's not really anything interesting in the list of authors that write in the best of they selected articles from over 4 years of issues, and there's not really any names that popped out. But I did read about the Asperger's Digest, Autism Asperger's Digest, and this book, and I got through. So the second paragraph down here, maybe I can switch to that. If I get to the second paragraph, third paragraph of this intro, so it's about autism book, right? So you read about the way it came about, and I don't know, maybe somebody else needs to read that. I just want to read this because as the digest gained a foothold in the autism community, it quickly attracted the stars in the field as contributing or regular authors. Tony Atwood, I don't know. Catherine Faherty, I don't know. Gary Misab, I don't know. Carol Gray, Peter Gerhardt, Bernard Rimland, Simon Baron Cohen. Isn't Simon Baron Cohen the dude that's all goofy with I can't remember, but he does a lot. That's Borat, isn't it? Luke Tsai, I don't know who that is. Andy Bondi, Barry Present, Laurie Ahrensberger, and Paul Shattuck. Now, if you remember, Paul Shattuck was, of course, the guy that came over to Paula Atkins' house and asked her for the details. After he'd already gotten all the details on the phone, he asked her for the details of the diet that cured her son Colin's gastrointestinal problems. And then after getting those details over the phone, he still came over to her house and wanted all the details, wanted to know all the ways that it, and then at a different way, through a different organization, through a different set of people, she got in contact with Andrew Wakefield, but then only found out later that Paul Shattuck and Andrew Wakefield did know each other, but Paul pretended not to know Andrew Wakefield. So that guy was mentioned in the best, of Autism Asperger's magazine. So he was in the community. He was working, but in a different part of it. And you can see how it's compartmentalized because somewhere else, there's no article by Polly Tommy in here as a guest writer. There's no mention of anybody that's writing in the autism file, like Judy Mikovits or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or anything like that. This is a whole different group of heroes that sees Asperger's and autism as a unified front, whereas the autism file apparently has a whole other set of heroes that has a whole other take on autism. And when you hear that Paula Aitken tried to reach out to Polly Tommy and got no real response at that time, then you can see a sort of very interesting picture in my mind of players that without the help of Paula Aitken, I would never understand them as potentially all being part of the same group of people that Polly Tommy and I only saw Polly Tommy and Wakefield together as this little unit. But if you also see their opposition, and their opposition is still making a living as an expert on Wakefield, that's pretty extraordinary.
The study and fabricated the appearance of a link with autism for personal gain and personal glory. And the result of that was that he was banned from medicine, and the research paper that he published was retracted by the Lancet.
Yet the alarm he created was real, leading to falling MMR rates and rising measles cases. Researchers around the globe set out to test Wakefield's findings, with studies that track large populations over time, that compare affected groups against those without a condition, and that analyze other research.
We sought to confirm to test the hypothesis that had been raised by the findings of the Wakefield study.
This was a systematic review of the existing evidence.
Dozens of studies came to the same conclusion.
There was no evidence of an association between the MMR vaccine and autism.
There was no association whatsoever in our study.
So that's what the science tells us. But many who continue to question vaccine safety, like Kennedy, ask, what then is behind the dramatic rise in autism rates?
Autism rates have gone from 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 1,500 to 1 in 10,000, depending on what study you look at. In my generation, as a 70-year-old man today, in our children, it's 1 in 34.
You can't even believe these numbers. 1 in 10,000 children had autism, 1 in 10,000, and now it's 1 in 36. There's something wrong, 1 in 36, think of that.
There was one landmark 1989 study of individuals in Utah which found the rate was 4 in 10,000, not 1 in 10,000, as Trump and Kennedy said. Official estimates began in 2000 and show the rate in children jumped from 1 in 150 that year to 1 in 31 in 2022. Still a huge increase. And researchers say there are a lot of reasons for that. Some we understand, but many we don't.
The first is changes in how we diagnose people or who we're including as having autism. The second is changes in recommendations from the American Association for Pediatrics to what pediatricians should be looking for in signs during wellness visits. The third reason is due to increased awareness and acceptance of autism in our communities. And then the fourth is changes in some trends over time for factors that we know are associated with increased likelihood of autism.
Wow, you know what I just thought of? And I wonder if Mark Kulak is listening, but Zika virus, the whole idea of Zika virus is weird, and the whole idea of microencephaly is weird. And I wonder if the people who are getting microencephaly were also vaccinated during pregnancy. Because that would be the easiest explanation. Because I remember there being something about wanting to vaccinate mothers before they, or while they were pregnant, and Zika was something like that. And so maybe they even tested it on, I don't know. Is that what we're dealing with here? Because that picture just a minute ago was a kid with microencephaly. He had like a goofy looking head.
And fathers being old. Third reason is due to increased awareness and acceptance of autism in our communities. And then the fourth is changes in some trends over time for factors that we know are associated with increased likelihood of autism. Things like preterm birth and fathers being older in age when they're having children.
But those alone don't explain all of the increase.
Some of the things my lab studies, and
this is one of the worst reports ever, how they're clipping clip to clip, and they clip from her to this clip. It's gross.
Focused on have been genes and how genes contribute to autism and how other environments or environmental factors also contribute to autism and brain development.
It is impossible that the guy that CHD put on stage every time they've ever organized anything has a book in 2016 called The Environmental and Genetic Causes of Autism. And they are a real anti-vax movement. It is impossible because Paul Offit also believes that it is a complex bouquet of genetic and environmental causes that explains autism, even though we're diagnosing it differently, and where it depends on how wide of a net you cast. It's all the same bullshit argument. And the reason why is because intramuscular injection is just plain dumb. And the only way they've been able to get away with it, I'm sure, is because a lot of it is placebo. It was a long con. If intramuscular injection is dumb, as I am suggesting and have been suggesting and unchallenged on for almost 2 years now, really a strong year and a half, I have been saying RNA cannot pandemic. I have been saying transfection in healthy people was always a crime, and intramuscular injection of any combination of substances with the intent of augmenting the immune system is dumb, but slowly realized that just intramuscular injection in general is dumb is a statement worth saying to get somebody to provoke a correction, and it hasn't happened yet. And instead, I have prominent people calling me JJ without links and criticizing my high production level. In case you're not aware, I use PowerPoint, and it's really, really simple. You know the magic trick? It's use the transition morph. Then it changes one slide to another slide. So if you copy A, and then you copy that slide over, and then you change some stuff, and you put the transition to morph, those changes will occur in animated form, and it'll look super cool. And so more words will move around, or letters will move around, and it looks like you put a lot of work into your... It's all about the red thread of thought that goes through it. And the fact of the matter is, at this point, after 5 years of watching my show develop, because I've been using PowerPoint for 5 years to do this, I've been using a green screen in my bedroom and then in my garage to do this. None of these people have the guts to think about the very simple summary statements that I've started my stream with and ended with for many years now. None of them have the guts, and that whole point is the reason why you can see that they are full of it. Because at some point in time, you've got to say, well, you know, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a drug addict, but he says some things right, except he doesn't. He says he's pro-vaccine. He wants safe vaccines, and Steve Kirsch says that he's going to give us safe vaccines. I say, and some other people have said, that autism is a mythology, that vaccination is a mythology, that arguing about mandates is slave speak, because intramuscular injection is just dumb. And this elaborate theater where the PBS NewsHour has dissolved into the title of James Lyon Weiner's book. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but this is the breaking moment. This is where the left and the right realize that we have been pitted against each other. This is the point where the left and the right realize that they need to have sympathy for one another, because the trap was as magnificent as it was malevolent. And now it's actually curious to see that it is the left who can't sustain. It is the left who is having to sort of adopt some of the talking points of the fake conservative right. And the reason why is because the script is, that's where we're going. We're going to this place where there are complex answers to these complex problems, and the only people who are going to provide those answers are technocrats on television and liars on social media. And that is their strategy for governing us. That is their strategy for getting to our grandchildren and getting our grandchildren into a digital prison where they are essentially experimental animals. And in the meantime, they're going to harvest as much of the DNA as they can through remnant streams and through other theaters on television, like maybe the bird flu to come. But autism is a mythology, and it is a mythology that has been around for decades. I'm talking since the time when they announced the Human Genome Project was done. They have been teaching us what autism is and telling us that it could be boys more than girls. Which of course indicates a genetic vulnerability. And don't worry, the transgender argument gets you to argue the same thing, because if you're arguing that sex is chromosomally dependent and defined, then you're kind of already on a slippery slope if you don't understand a new biology, but you just understand the old biology, then you're about to say that genes matter the most. And for certain things, that's true. But you must understand the illusion, the trap that they're getting you in when you get fighting about transgenderism. It's much more diabolical than just a communist thing. You know, they're trying to sell us this, it's just communist attack, and they're using fifth generation warfare to ruin our culture. No, it's even worse than that. They're actually trying to enslave your grandkids. And they want you to argue about this. They want you to get really mad about the fact that sex is determined by genes. Because then you'll be on their slippery slope and they can kick you right down to where you accept the fact that, you know what? Genes. It's genes. We need to have all that data. Boy, I hope we have somewhere to store it soon.
Environmental factors like the air we breathe, what we eat and drink, infections, and many more.
There are so many factors in the environment. The question is where to look. And when you look for one, you find that interacts with another one, right? So, for example, what if children experiencing a lot of stress in their households is a factor that contributes to autism? Well, maybe those very families are the ones using more screens. So is it the stress or is it screen time?
Researchers are now...
Is it stress or is it screen time? Gee, I wonder. So, you know, some families hit their kids in the head with a baseball bat 7 or 8 times before they're 1 year old, and other families don't do that.
Now working to determine what these many factors could be and how they might interact with many genes to cause autism. Some are also studying how to detect autism even earlier in life, using brainwave analysis on infants, well before behavioral signs show up.
The reason this work is so important is that
the reason why this work is so important is that it perpetuates a myth that this is a developmental disorder. You know, the trajectory across time, that they have no idea how it works. They have this little idea that, oh, we have the recipe list. Here's all the 100,000 proteins. So I guess we understand everything now. And the illusion is that there is a developmental sign to find. Why don't they do this brain scan right before and right after an intramuscular injection? I mean, if they really wanted to know, right? Why don't they do the brain scan on the kids and watch the brain change? Oh, yeah. They don't even have a hypothesis which addresses the issue. Their hypothesis is that it is a developmental thing that can be seen early in childhood. How would they differentiate between a kid with a gift and a kid with a gift? How would they differentiate between, I mean, this is just absurd. It's absurd in a number of different levels, too. It's absurd from a neuroscience perspective. It's absurd from a biological and developmental perspective. And it's absurd from the mythology of autism, that it perpetuates it with a high degree of effectiveness. It perpetuates the idea that there's autism. Just this picture of all those electrodes on this little kid's head. It's so malevolent.
They give us a way to predict in the first half year of life which babies will go on to develop autism. And if we can do that, then we, A, can scale this up throughout the United States in pediatric clinics, for example, and B, we can start to develop interventions that can be used in babies as young as 3 to 6 months of age.
Researchers say this should be the focus going forward, not another study looking for a connection between vaccines and autism.
You know, at the population level, it's been answered. There have been innumerable studies, in fact, to such a point that they have actually stopped.
The population level data is, if it's real, only possible because they put out so many placebo. And I'm going to probably go to my grave believing that. There's no other way to explain it. There's simply no other way to explain it. They don't get lucky that often. And that would require an extraordinary. It's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Conducting the studies, from what I could see, or.
And again, We are watching a news program. We are watching a... I got to get out of there. That didn't work very well, did it? We were watching a news program, right, where they were using a bunch of people with foreign accents again. Why do we have to talk to people with foreign accents when we have a country of 350 million people? Why do I have to hear from experts that can't barely speak English from Columbia University? How, in fact, can somebody be the head of something at Columbia University and barely able to speak English? Unless it's by design. Unless so much sand is being shoveled into our eyes that we have no hope of seeing. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you find your intellectual eyewash station right here at Gigaohm Biological. Thanks very much for being here. I'll be back in a second. Once again, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for using a little bit of your time to listen to me today. This is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. The voice you hear is that biologist, Jonathan JJCouey. I come to you out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You can find the stain of my academic work on the National Library PubMed website. With my last name and my first initials. You can also find a lot of my work on the Woodhouse 76 Substack, where Jessica Hockett and Jonathan Engler oftentimes water down some of my work and then title it a little different and use it to argue with people like Claire Craig or Pierre Corey, who are both in on this from the very beginning. So if you want to check out some of that work, go right ahead. Just remember that they're not going to cite me, or it'll just be my slides in different colors and that kind of thing. I also helped Children Health Defense as a staff scientist under Brian Hooker for a long time in 2023, and also helped Robert F. Kennedy Jr. write the Wuhan cover-up book, and I'm even listed as an expert in it. Yes, biology is the way. I really like Bob, and I really like Bob's work, and I think Bob is really on the same page as me. Some of these people have pretended to apologize. They're not really apologizing. You got to look at what they say, because this is for all the marbles, ladies and gentlemen. There is definitely a fake anti-vax movement in America. It may be somewhat funded by, supported by, coordinated by a guy by the name of Steve Bannon. It could also be related to... I'm sure it's related to a guy by the name of Robert Malone, Robert Wallace Malone, if you want his whole name, his wife, Jill Glasspool Malone, and also a guy by the name of Kevin McKernan, formerly of the Human Genome Project. I think doing some research into these people, their background, their conflicts of interest, and how they have probably managed to curate a fake anti-vax movement that can talk about biology but not really tell any truths. I think that's where we are. I think you got to seek the truth. If you want to find it, you got to seek it, though. Oh, what's that now? That one. And when you want to seek the truth, the first thing you need to really understand is that the pandemic itself, the whole illusion of public health, the whole illusion of AIDS, the whole illusion of chronic fatigue syndrome is being actively maintained by actors. And those actors are experts on TV that don't know any better. But there are also actors behind the scenes of these organizations and these bureaucracies and these meetings that actually do know the truth and do know that the idea that evolution because DNA is a horrible hoax. They know probably about the fact that as far back as Hillary Kaprowski and Joshua Lederberg and Julian Huxley and Herman Muller, people were talking in very similar terms in the 50s in these private meetings of very smart people that they're talking now, just with a little more certainty. And the certainty, I feel, really comes from the illusion that the Human Genome Project has created, that something was done, something is done, and now we know things. And that illusion is this, evolution because DNA. Now we found it, we know all the genes. It's just a matter of time before we take over and start managing the evolution of the species. That's how these people think. And it might be that they're using cat enthusiasts and using horse enthusiasts. I don't know. But a few of these people are, from a mentor perspective, they've worked with too many of the people that have to know. Francis Collins definitely knows. Mark Lander definitely knows. Murray Gardner and Bob Gallo definitely know. And being so associated with Judy Mikovits for so long, these are all, one set of deep state, whatever you want to call it, actors. And we have to be very, very careful about not being tricked into being too precise with our explanation. Too precise would be something like saying it's the DOD. Too precise would be saying something like it's Hunter Biden and Metabiota. Too precise would be saying something like it's a lab leak. Because all of these very precise explanations will, by design, fall short of describing the depth of the illusion. Because the depth of the illusion includes telling us stories about viruses without telling us any stories about phages. Even though the biological presence of phages and bacteria is orders of magnitude more important to our daily existence and orders of magnitude more relevant as a background signal than anything that they can describe as a norovirus, a flu virus, a coronavirus, or any of these other viruses that they say are our pathogens, that are out to get us, that are ever evolving to get us. This whole illusion of virology requires that you don't understand two things. Phages and bacteria, that's one thing. And because that's one thing, it's one phenomenon, it's one entity. You can't call phages something separate from bacteria any more than you can call exosomes something separate from our body. And so we need to reorient our understanding so that we can help reorient our children's understanding, so that as this bad biology continues to be spread over too much bread, they will notice, and they will be able to see that they're running out. There's no more mayonnaise on the knife anymore, and they're still getting more bread out of the bag and still spreading as though they're making sandwiches, and they're not. And that really, I think, became evident reading this article from 2000 about what they were going to do or not do, and how many times did they do it, how many replicates were there. Man, oh man. They have made no progress in 25 years, other than making some things cheaper and probably creating a lot more intellectual property. And so I believe that we can get rid of this fake vaccine movement if we don't even focus on it. Instead, try to understand how a background could be misconstrued as a pandemic, a background that we should just understand as an irreducibly complex genetic background that's almost exclusively produced by the bacteria that we are in symbiotic relationship with, that the plants are in symbiotic relationship with, that make up the soil, that are present in all of our water supplies. Ladies and gentlemen, with a non-specific PCR test, they could take that bacteriophage and bacteria background and misconstrue it as the spread of a novel virus with just a few well-placed liars. And since this is about national security, since all of these countries have the same population pyramid problem to use to their advantage, never let a crisis go to waste, then it makes perfect sense why none of these people that are acting for these governing weaponized piles of money. I don't need to tell you who they're working for. I don't even know. How would I know? I'm just a guy in the back of my garage. But RNA cannot pandemic, and they don't have the biology to address that. Intramuscular injection is dumb. There should be a doctor by now who's written me a letter that says, you know, dude, there are a couple exceptions to that, just so you know. But there isn't. Transfecting healthy people is a crime. The reason why they can't address this is because people like Brian Hooker know that that's what they should have called it from the beginning. People like Kevin McKernan has admitted on X that that's what they should have called it from the very beginning, but he did not. And in fact, he was on podcast after podcast after podcast for 5 years, specifically not calling it transfection and transformation, but calling them vaccines, just like his employers wanted him to. One of the things I wanted to point out about yesterday that I didn't notice in this magazine of the Human Genome Project is they actually said something here that I think is really important. They said that where is it? Where is it? Wait, I just saw it. Okay, maybe it's in the other one. Hold on a second. Let me find it. Yeah, the major players. That was a different page. So this major player, Lion Bioscience, this one, that one, the other, Oxford Medical Group, Informax. I didn't read this one, see? So I wanted to show this one. This one's in Heidelberg, Germany, Bayer, and okay, this is interesting, right? And then NetJex, this is in, and this has Abbott. So I didn't read this yesterday. I want you to see this. Double Twist, John Couch, Proprietary Tools, and so then Compugen, Bayer, Human Genome Sciences. Wait, so I'm missing a page here. Hold on, let me find the page that I wanted to find. Shoot. No. Okay, wait. I just read it. Dang it. Oh, yeah, here, yeah. There's another page that looks the same. See, now here, this is the one we showed. Celera, Human Genome Sciences, Insight Genomics, Millennium Pharmaceuticals, the Human Genome Project. Look carefully at the joint collaborators, the Department of Energy. That's the highest level of security. Why? Because that's nukes, right, Mark? So it is really the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy is the lead executives, Ari Petrinos. So the Department of Energy is important there, I think. It's important to point that out because that is the highest level of government security. That's where the nukes are. That's where DITRA is, I think. And you can follow Mark Kulak. He's done a lot of shows about DITRA and Luger and all this other stuff and how it's all kind of connected to the vaccination of the military and bioterrorism and, all this other stuff, in addition to nukes. Yeah, it's not really good. We still have to think our way out, and I'm looking forward to starting a couple new series about this, but I'm trying to see myself as a biology coach. I want to give you stuff to read. I want to show you what I'm doing to try and double check my work, hoping that at some point in time I'm going to be wrong, and then I can just focus on basketball or something else. But apparently it really is not going to be refuted by any of these people that there was an anticipated rise in expected deaths. Even 60 Minutes is reporting now that our population pyramids are a little goofy. I actually uploaded to my website under the heading Stuff, and you don't have to scroll down very far, a McKinsey report about the fact that the population pyramids of the West are about to collapse. And now what comes along with that is a brief rise in expected deaths from the excess number of old people from when families were more productive. And so it was an opportunity. That's why Tony Fauci was able to predict it. That's why people like Ted Turner have been predicting it. Potentially Social Security going to go bankrupt, the NHS going to go bankrupt. So how are they covering it up? Well, they cover it up with stuff like this. This is like 2 days ago.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. So I can honestly say I am the only Nobel laureate who has ever thanked a photocopy machine in their Nobel speech. You young folks can ask the older folks what a photocopy machine is.
Just very briefly, I want to address Vilma in the chat. As I understand it, my friend who works in government explained to me that DITRA is connected to a lot of organizations. It's only about 80 people, really. I don't really understand what DITRA is, so I don't want to argue about it. But the DOD is connected to a lot of things. I mean, my dad was in the Navy, so that doesn't make me automatically bad. And the DOD being connected to things doesn't make the DOD the heart of it. I still believe that the DOD should be thought of more like a weapon, and you don't blame the weapon, you blame the people that are wielding the weapon. And the wielding of the weapon is oftentimes done by the executive branch. So the way that the laws have been put in place have put more and more power to direct or to trigger the DOD in the heart and the hands of the executive branch, which a lot of people would argue that's the way it's supposed to be. He's the commander-in-chief. But if it's not in the commander-in-chief's hands, but it's in the HHS secretary's hands, and the laws and the directives and the national security operations that are tied to those directives tell the DOD to transfect its troops, I don't think that there's any place in that chain of command where you go, okay, so now we should line up the military and put them on trial. So much as try to figure out, okay, so who is responsible for putting these in place? Who's responsible for understanding that? Who was instead put in place to pretend they don't understand it? Like Aaron Siri, who pretends not to understand. Even I would go so far as to say that the people who are attacking the PrEP Act are seeming to pretend that they don't understand that the way to attack the PrEP Act is to point out that a non-elected official is empowered to suspend a whole list of fundamental rights, but the official that is allowed to do it is not held to strict scrutiny. And we have a long precedence in American law for any time there being a suspension of fundamental rights by a law, by a government, thing, then that government needs to be held to strict scrutiny. There needs to be a set of circumstances that justify it. And maybe that process is not perfect. Maybe that process could still result in some kind of totalitarian violation of our civil rights. But those words, strict scrutiny, and what they mean with regard to the government suspending fundamental rights, this is like a law school, an L1 class in constitutional law, as far as I understand. All I can do is read books. I never went to law school. But Aaron Siri seems incapable of explaining why the PrEP Act could be struck as unconstitutional. There are other people that have been put in front of us that claim that the PrEP Act is treasonous, that the PrEP Act is very bad, but they can't explain it in legal terms as simply as I have been able to explain it for a couple years now. That when the government suspends fundamental rights, we have a principle in America, it should be held to strict scrutiny. The other magical thing about this is that any lawyer in the UK or any lawyer in the Canada should have absolutely jack all idea what I'm talking about, because these are legal principles established in American law. These words don't mean very much in the UK. They mean nothing in Canada. And so what is Viva Frei doing herding American cats? What is Viva Frei doing talking American law when he probably knows less about American law than I do? Why? Not because he's a lawyer, but because he's a lawyer in Canada. And so in order to be a lawyer in Canada, you'd need to be an expert on a whole bunch of shit that would only confuse your potential understanding of American law and American precedents. Not saying he couldn't do it, but he's another guy who hasn't gotten to the point where he can say that the PrEP Act is a law that allows an unelected official to suspend a number of fundamental rights without being held to strict scrutiny. And this is reason to strike the law as unconstitutional. There's no Harvard law school professor saying that. There's no Columbia law professor that's really anti-vax that's capable of saying that. Mary Holland has had a microphone shoved in her mouth for the last 15 years and hasn't been able to say that. Mary Holland, Esquire. I got in front of Bobby Ann Cox at a Brownstone event in Pittsburgh and asked her about this, and she just panicked. And then this guy Mendenhall came over, and I said to him that this woman doesn't seem to understand what I'm saying. All I'm trying to say is that the PrEP Act is unconstitutional because an unelected official is allowed to suspend a number of fundamental rights without being held to strict scrutiny of any kind. There's not even a list of reasons required. It's just the rational basis test. Anybody who's never been to law school or read a law school book might not know what the rational basis test is, but it's just basically you just have to have a rational reason, like a hunch. And then you can do whatever you want. That's the PrEP Act. Not like, 10,000 Americans have to die of the same thing. Not there, and when is it over? When you are no longer allowed to suspend fundamental rights is also not codified in that law at all. All makes it unconstitutional. But Goldman Sachs lawyer Aaron Siri can't seem to figure that out. Pam Popper on YouTube can't seem to figure that out. Tom Renz, he can't seem to figure that out. Mary Holland, she can't seem to figure that out. All of these American people, maybe Mary Holland can't figure it out because of the 3 years she spent in Russia studying Russian law or something like that screwed her up. Maybe Aaron Siri can't figure it out because he works for Goldman Sachs like Steve Bannon works for Goldman Sachs. Let's listen to more science here. This is really recent in Pennsylvania.
Katie Carrico and I started working together in 1997. That's when I came to Penn from the National Institutes of Health from Tony Fauci's lab. You've probably heard of him and a few other things. So when I came over, Katie and I, the only way you could read a journal article back then was to photocopy it. So we would wait for each other and talk. And mostly Katie talked, and I got a few words in here and there. But we talked about our interests and what we were doing and what we wanted to work on. Katie worked on RNA, and she would deliver RNA to any kind of cells, any kind of cell line, and ask, is protein made? I had worked in HIV pathogenesis, and I worked on dendritic cells. So I'm not going to overwhelm you with science, but dendritic...
Understand that what he is admitting here is he worked on the exact project that Tony Fauci talked to a BBC reporter about in 2011, which is a HIV vaccine that was targeting dendritic cells, where Tony Fauci was telling stories about having to do it better than the immune system does. Solving the problem that the immune system couldn't solve. That's a pretty bold statement, right? So this guy worked in that project under Tony Fauci, which means that, this guy could have very little actual understanding about what he does and what the implication of what he's done is. You can hear it in his voice.
Cells are the cell that starts all immune reactions. And what that means is that dendritic cells are the critical cell for making a vaccine. So my interest was, I wanted to get mRNA to load dendritic cells. And here I am bumping into somebody at a copy machine.
Now, what's really interesting is that if you got mRNA into dendritic cells, I guess the dendritic cells would express the protein, would make the protein that was encoded by the mRNA. This is in no way the encoding of a protein by RNA in a dendritic cell, and then the making of that protein is in no way related, as far as we understand, to the function of dendritic cells, which is antigen presentation. The reason why I turned the reverb on there is for you to understand that for a very long time, they've had people like this guy or people like Peter Cullis pretending that if we could just target one specific type of cell, then this would work out. One of the videos that I show in my longer intros is this video of a computer-generated coronavirus coming out of the sky and bonding to a membrane and then getting sucked in. Later in that video, they show a needle coming in and the nanoparticles coming out, and those nanoparticles going into a dendritic cell. As if the way that the mRNA vaccine works is that it goes to dendritic cells, those dendritic cells express a protein and then present it to T cells. But that's not at all how this works. There's a phagocytotic event where the dendritic cell is sampling from the damage-associated molecular pattern and then deciding what to present. And I don't know that there's any protein synthesis involved in that presentation. And that presentation, of course, occurs on an adjusted MHC molecule. So you have this really interesting set of oversimplified cartoons of immunology. And a lot of these people that are in vaccinology, per se, they don't understand that understanding that cartoon is not understanding. They think that that's part of their expertise. That work was done by other people. So I don't need to understand it, how it was done. I don't need to check it or understand the details of it. I can just start there.
Who makes RNA and gives it to cells. It was a Reese's moment. Again, you'll have to ask an older person what that means. But we started working together, and we spent 8 years fighting our way in the lab, figuring out what was going on and how do we get RNA to work better. And that led us to our paper in 2005 that allowed us to identify a critical change that was needed in mRNA to get it to work better. So if you look back in the late 90s, many people, many labs, many pharmaceutical companies were working with RNA. It went into clinical trials, it went into people trials, and it failed. Everybody at that point in time gave up on it. They said, it's too hard to work with, it's too fragile, it's too difficult, it doesn't make enough protein, it doesn't work, and they gave up on it. And that was it. Our RNA was dead. So when Katie...
That's basically the story of Robert Malone, right? He sold it to Merck, or Inderverma sold him out, or it wasn't going to work, or the immune reaction was too great, and then they got out of it. But he's still the inventor, and Jill Glasspool Malone is sure that he saved a lot of people by inventing it.
And I investigated this. We found that we could modify the RNA and make it more stable, make it produce much more protein, and that's what went into the first 2 COVID vaccines that were approved and helped to stem the tide of the pandemic. This is just a calculation of what effect the vaccines had on the COVID-19 pandemic. And what it's noting is both the up and down nature of the pandemic, but importantly, once vaccines were introduced, the number of deaths from COVID-19 greatly dropped by enormous amounts. It's been calculated the vaccine...
This is the numbers from the CDC. So do you see a tremendous drop in numbers of COVID? I do too. It's remarkable. It happened right at the beginning of, or the end of 2022, the beginning of 2023. It just stopped. It's like they forgot how to treat pneumonia for about 2 years, and then at the end of 2022, right about here, they just kind of remembered again. Isn't that weird?
Saved between 15 and 20 million lives. So
imagine thinking that you saved between 15 and 20 million lives. It must feel good. I mean, he must get up in the morning and just like think he's got to drink a Mountain Dew for breakfast.
Katie and I spent 25 years working on mRNA, trying to turn it into something useful. And it finally became useful in a vaccine. Now, neither of us, thinking back from 1997 when we first met, ever thought that the vaccine would be proven in a century.
Now, not that dissimilar to Denny Rancor or the guy named Dowd or even Nick Hudson. There's a lot of people out there who've done the numbers and who are capable of doing the numbers who have no idea that there was an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality, that with a little bit of negligence, antibiotics don't work on a viral syndrome. They could use this buildup of old people that they don't really want to spend the money to keep all of these people alive for as long as possible, because that would bankrupt the system. So that's kind of a national security concern. So what if everybody that came to the hospital was given some supplementary oxygen, and anybody that developed pneumonia, we would put on a ventilator, but not treat it because it's a viral pneumonia? And what if we only did that for 2 years? What would the result look like? What if in addition to that we used a little do not resuscitate orders? We sent all the old doctors home and let the residents take care of the ER for a couple years? What if we scared everybody on TV about a lab leak behind the scenes? What if we had some doctors go on the internet and say that I'm using supplementary oxygen with 60 liters a minute because we're running out of ventilators? What if we had a billionaire go on the news and say that he was going to switch the electric car factory that he has to making ventilators because this is such a shit show? What if we gave an incentive to all the corporate hospitals in America to classify non-COVID deaths as COVID deaths, even suspected COVID deaths, because we gave them $35,000 per patient? Not to the doctor who was heroically trying to save them, or to the staff that was risking their lives and going to work to try and save us from the pandemic. We didn't give them $35,000 for every person that they tried to save. We gave it to the corporate hospital owners. What about the hundreds of companies around the United States that took money from the government to put together a group of people that would professionally track and trace contacts of people who had positive cases? They paid people $40 an hour to call the contacts of people that were testing positive for COVID. Where did those companies go? There was lateral flow test fraud in the UK, tests that were produced in China and then used in the UK to define the pandemic, to starve old people in old folks' homes that died of thirst and cold and hunger and urinary tract infection, all because a viral syndrome is not appropriately treated with antibiotics. And in the meantime, we have this incredibly unsophisticated guy pretending that he just kind of fell face first into the butter. Oh, well. And they're happy to put him on stage on the biggest audiences and promote these videos, because a lot of people are not sophisticated enough to understand this, because the truth has never actually been told to them. Only a very complicated version of some explanation combined with some dumb, simple version, and then mixed together in some fire hose of information, when it's just very simple. It's incredibly simple. That's why it makes it's so aggravating that there is an anti-vax movement that for 20 years could have just said intramuscular injection is dumb and everything else is smoke and mirrors. No big books. I don't need a whole rack. This is a whole rack. This is a whole rack of books. None of these books are cool books or, you know, like great biology books. Those are down here. You know, like antibody phage display and all the methods and protocols of it. These are cool books. Like this book, Concepts of Symbiogenesis. I'm knocking some books off the back. It's so many books in here. These are all the books from the anti-vax movement and when they came out, in what order. Look at this for a minute. 1988. Immunization, Reality Behind the Myth. You ever heard of this book? Did Suzanne Humphreys cite this book? Brian Hooker ever tell you about this book? How about this book? Also from 1988, Eustace Mullins, Injection, Murder by Injection. You ever heard of this book before? I got a signed copy of it. 1988. 1991, The Virus Hunter, Robert Gallo. Great book. Wow, nail biter. Shot in the Dark by Barbara Lowe Fisher. Why the P in DTP may be hazardous to your child's health. This is an interesting alternative narrative to the MMR. We need to have an M and an M and an R and not an MMR. This is a similar spin. This is the lady that is responsible for the NVIC, and this is in 1991. How in the hell is it possible? 1991? Let's see. Then Horowitz's book comes out in 1996. That's Emerging Viruses, Big Thick Ebola thing, right? This is the guy who was fighting against Bob Gallo in a recording that we've seen. 98 is when Dancing in a Naked in Minefields comes out with Carrie Mullis. The Big Shot in 01. This is a book that Mark has done a lot of work on. Fascinating. I've only read like the first half of it and then I stopped. I usually do that. I come back and I usually inevitably open the book where I need to open it and I just read those parts. Interestingly, this bookshelf starts in 2008 with a Skyhorse Publishing book, Don't Start the Revolution Without Me. And this is the book where chapter 12 has an epilogue in it, and the epilogue is a glimpse of the future, and Ventura gets elected, and he gets elected with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his running mate, and after he gets elected with as a running mate, he gets out of Iraq, and then he's independent, and then he challenges the two leading parties to a debate. Starting to sound familiar. And then the two parties have a convention, and then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. leaves the Democratic Party and agrees to join Jesse Ventura as a running mate, and then the Kennedy-Ventura ticket surges in the polls. Remember, this is a 2008 Skyhorse Publishing book. And then U.S. bombs Iran. Then declares martial law after Iranian terror bombs go off in 5 cities. And then a gunman shoots Ventura. And I guess Bobby Kennedy becomes the president. That's pretty remarkable. And it's something to do with Fidel Castro. I mean, so that's the Skyhorse Publishing book that comes out in what would be 2008. So that's not even on the screen here yet. This is only 2013 in this graph. Then in 2010, there's a book called The History of the Peanut Allergy Epidemic, and this is in 2010. I just want you to see, the reason why I mention this book is because this is the first edition of the book, 2010, right? That's 2 years after the Ventura book that announces that Bobby Kennedy is going to get to the White House as vice president, and then he's going to get, or his president will be shot, and then he'll be so this book comes out 2 years later. In the same year that the peanut allergy epidemic book came out, Callous Disregard by Andrew Wakefield comes out with a foreword by Jenny McCarthy. Then Polly Tommy's book comes out in 2011. It's not with Skyhorse Publishing, though. It's with something like Pradicus, and it's Autism, A Practical Guide to Improving Your Child's Quality of Life. So this is not a book that's going to tell you not to take any vaccines. This is a book that's going to tell you how to, I guess, fix the gut or some shit like that. And in the same year, 2011, Viral Storm by Nathan Wolfe comes out. This is the guy who apparently had used metagenomic sequencing, shotgun sequencing that was invented by the guy that found the phages in the mucus of coral. That guy, he used metagenomic sequencing to look for the dark matter of life and all these viruses, and none of them are involved in bacteria. They're all against us, I guess. Anyway, this is also a fake virologist, right? He's very similar to, it's like the American version of Peter Daszak, and he's connected to Hunter Biden and the fake labs that are in the Ukraine. And they may have just been producing a lot. So then in 2012, you've got Waging the War on the Autistic Child, also by some guy by the name of Andrew Wakefield, also Skyhorse Publishing. And then in 2013, you have Dissolving Illusions that comes out with Suzanne Humphreys, and she doesn't seem to be aware of any books that came before her. She just has some graphs that she got from some guy named Roman, and she tells you in that video with Brandy Vaughn that, you know, Roman did all the work and all she did was just, you know, help write the book or something like that. And then in 2016, Skyhorse Publishing puts out James Lyons Weiler's book, Environmental and Genetic Causes of Autism, which just has basically restated the title and premise of the book on PBS NewsHour 2 days ago. And in that year later, the third edition of Peanut Allergy Epidemic comes out, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote the foreword. Huh. So I thought I'd read the foreword that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote to the third addition to this book in 2017, before the World Mercury Project changed its name to Children's Health Defense and employed Brian Hooker and Mary Holland and Meryl Nass to underneath the general counsel, Mr. Bobby Kennedy. And also they had, of course, Rolf Hazelhurst involved, and he's also a hero that they don't talk about ever. So let's go over here. This is the introduction, again, to the Peanut Allergy Epidemic, the third edition. This is a book by Heather Frazier, which we don't hear very much of, and the foreword by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Remember, again, the reason why I'm saying this is because the book originally came out in 2010, not in 2017. And it's basically the same book, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr. released another version of it with Skyhorse Publishing, right? See it on the back there. And did the foreword to it. Now you might think, oh, wow. You know, now you're going to see a thing where he connects the book that she wrote about the peanut allergy and vaccines to a lot of other things. Because, of course, he's about to change the World Mercury Project to Children's Health Defense. He was already in the movie Vaxxed. He's already, you know, met all of these people. He knows about ICANN because it's already formed. But Skyhorse Publishing, that published how many years earlier? Skyhorse Publishing published a book with Jesse Ventura suggesting that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would be a great vice president in 2008. And in 2017, Bobby Kennedy is writing the foreword to a Skyhorse Publishing version of the peanut allergy epidemic. What I think I see here is a political movement that is hijacking a anti-vax movement for its own purposes, with no intention of ever forwarding any of the real biological ideas, like intramuscular injection is dumb, and you can see that by comparing the biology of ingestion versus injection. And so let's read this forward just for shits and giggles. My son Connor was born in 1994 and developed chronic asthma, food allergies, and anaphylaxis that required 29 emergency room visits before he was 3 years old. His brother Finn, born 4 years later, also developed anaphylaxis. What are the chances? Neither their mother nor I had any allergies, not even allergic to poison ivy. I don't even know what that means. Epidemic allergy in our children emerged suddenly and then ramped up inexorably throughout the 1990s in every American community. Its impacts affect our businesses, public spaces, transportation, and schools. Without explanation, children with allergies to peanuts, milk, fish, bee venom, latex, pollens, and more were filling our classrooms. Peanut allergy is now so prevalent that it impacts everyday consumer behavior. 30% of polled mothers said that nut allergy influenced food purchase decisions, and 67% considered nut allergy when buying snacks for an event with children. We have all watched in bewilderment as peanut allergies among children skyrocketed from 0.8% in 2002 to 1.4% in 2008. Just 3 years later, in 2011, another study indicated an incidence as high as 2.8. Upwards of 2 million children in the United States are now allergic to peanuts. Schools learn to protect vulnerable kids with cupboards filled with EpiPens and puffers, hand-washing protocols, food bans, and exempt spaces, inconveniences that sometimes annoy non-allergy families but provided some reassurance to worried parents like me. Incidentally, I knew an adult in Norway, an American, the husband of a colleague of mine, and he was peanut allergic to the point where he needed to go to the hospital like immediately if he was exposed to it. Initially, researchers believed peanut allergy was unique to Western countries, specifically United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and the United States. Then suddenly similar epidemics exploded in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Africa. Where is this coming from? I knew the answer could not be solely genetic. As my friend Dr. Boyd Haley, chairman of emeritus of the University of Kentucky Department of Chemistry, says, genes don't cause epidemics. Genes can provide vulnerability, but then you need an environmental toxin. What toxin had launched the allergy cascade? So what toxin? It must be a specific toxin. It can't be a methodology. It can't be like getting hit in the head with a hard object. And it doesn't really matter what the object is. You know, that's how you should see it. If I hit you in the head with a dumbbell, or I hit you in the head with a baseball bat, or I hit you in the head with a ball-peen hammer, or I hit you in the head with the handle of a screwdriver, there's certain differences there for sure. Some might have more lethality than others. But arguing about it, the difference between a ball-peen hammer doing it, or is it weights, or is it a dumbbell, is where they're going when they say, but what toxin? In 1998, I was among a group of young parents who co-founded the Food Allergy Initiative. So in 1998, he was already getting in these groups to research cures for food allergies. Interesting that would be around the same time that Paul Shattuck would come to Paula Aitken's house and find out why her son didn't have the bowel problems that all these other kids had. FAI did extraordinary work in developing treatments, but I remained intensely curious about identifying the cause. Intensely curious. He really wants to figure this shit out. In my own research, I learned that a host of other childhood epidemics, autism, ADD, ADHD, SIDS, OCD, ASD, narcolepsy, sleep and seizures disorder, developmental delays, autoimmune diseases, and tics all began rising in the early 90s. Sounds like he's about to get violent, right? He sounds like he's going to go buy a gun and start shooting people because this is really serious. This is not fucking around anymore. Excuse my language. Coincidentally, this is the time period during which the Center for Disease Control and Prevention dramatically expanded the vaccine schedule, raising children's exposure to mercury, aluminum, and other toxic vaccine ingredients, which people like Brandy Vaughn have put on billboards. Public health authorities expanded the schedule, including a battery of metal-laden vaccines, first in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, and subsequently in Asia and Africa, along a timeline exquisitely correlated with the explosion of these new childhood epidemics in these locales. Abundant peer-reviewed science linked mercury, a known neurotoxin, to... Sorry, I gotta fold that a little different. Injuries that now, according to the CDC, afflict 1 in 6 Americans. In 2003, I wrote a book assembling and synthesizing hundreds of these studies. I wonder what book that is. As I searched the medical literature on PubMed, I occasionally came across studies linking these contaminants to anaphylaxis, asthma, allergies, and eczema. While the timing of the anaphylaxis explosion suggests a link to sudden expansion of the vaccine schedule, the published science on its origins was surprisingly sparse. Scientists and public health officials have offered numerous theories purporting to explain the epidemic. The hygiene hypothesis, GMOs, glyphosate-based pesticides, environmental pollutants, peanut mold, but the proliferation of these exposures did not neatly coincide with the allergy epidemic. None of these potential causes explain the sudden meteoric rise of anaphylaxis in the early 90s. Seeking answers that might help end the epidemic, National Peanut Allergy Board, along with the Food Allergy Research and Education and the National Institutes of Health funded the LEAP study in 2010. However, the study, which was published in 2015 in the New England Journal of Medicine, sheds little light on causation. We learned only that children at risk of developing peanut allergy were also those who already had severe egg allergy or eczema. The only person in my family who has any allergies at all, besides me having developed eczema after my rabies vaccination at the University of Pittsburgh, is my daughter, who for a while was allergic to eggs. And I think that allergy went away because she was breastfed for so long. But she also got the hepatitis B and vitamin K shot on her birth without our permission because we did not know it was coming. And we didn't know it was coming because there was no effective warning system out there. Nobody like Children's Health Defense had any billboards up there that was at least trying to eliminate vaccines on birthdays. Unfortunately. Don't want to spend money on that. We've got too many big salaries to pay at Children's Health Defense to spend money on billboards that might save babies from injections on day 1. Serious allergies can lead to more allergies. That struck me as a circular conclusion and brought us no closer to answering the riddle. What was triggering? It really feels like he kind of wants to know. In the summer of 2016, I asked Dr. James Baker, head of the nonprofit FAIR, formerly FAI, and former senior vice president of Merck's vaccine division, whether vaccines could cause a food allergy epidemic. I'm just shocked that this is Merck. He told me it was a possibility that should be looked into, but unfortunately nobody is studying it at that moment. Dr. Baker's candor was refreshing. Most scientists understand the radioactive peril of raising questions that implicate vaccine safety. Scientists like doctors and journalists know that a vaccine debate can be a career-ending minefield. Now, what I want you to understand is that if you believe what you said you believed on the page before this, then you need to call for courage. Not that dissimilar to trying to understand, if you really think that abortion is murdering babies, then, I understand why you might go to extreme measures. I really do. I don't think you should, because I don't think extreme measures are a good way of solving human problems, but they may be necessary. If you think hundreds of thousands of kids are being given autism and ADD and ADHD and SIDS and OCD and ASD, and which ASD is autism spectrum disorder, but autism is listed. See, that's what's so stupid about this, right? Autism is listed here. attention deficit disorder. This is like hyperactivity disorder, which is kind of the same thing. Then SIDS, then OCD, then ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. So is this really trying to win here by being super precise, or are you actually screwing people over who don't understand that this list is bullshit? It's repeating here and it's repeating here. No chronic fatigue syndrome is listed here. Even though he's, later going to promote Judy Mikovits as being a hero for maybe coming out about chronic fatigue syndrome being related to the vaccines, because the vaccines are contaminated with a mouse virus, right? So around that time of discussion with Dr. Baker, I stumbled on Heather's book and I devoured it ravenously. Heather has done for allergies what Jared Diamond did for the broader concept of human history in his book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. Guns, Germs, and Steel is a really interesting book because in Guns, Germs, and Steel, the biological weapons are not viruses. Did you know that? The biological weapons that he discusses there are bacteria that are genetically modified to produce proteins that are human proteins. And so if you get exposed to this bacteria, and the bacteria causes an infection like salmonella would, then your body will develop antibodies and an immune response to the proteins on the outside of that bacteria. And if those proteins were myelin, then your body would develop a very advanced form of MS, multiple sclerosis, in a matter of weeks. And they did that by producing salmonella that had myelin protein on the outside. Nothing to do with gain-of-function viruses. That is a transfected bacterial culture. That is the biological warfare that's outlined in Jared Diamond's book. Think about that. Viruses are this hypothetical thing that based on your assumption that RNA can do that stuff. But a transfected culture of salmonella that is expressing myelin protein on the outside is a nasty, nasty, real biological weapon. Although she's not a scientist, she used her gift to synthesize a wide range of scientific disciplines in history to arrive at a simple and coherent, integrated, and common sense hypothesis that for the first time convincingly explains the sudden onset of the allergy epidemic. Her theory accounts for its steep rise in America and its subsequent movement from Western nations into the developed world. Heather tracks the epidemic causes, the allergy epidemic's causes to U.S. political, legal, and medical reforms in the late 80s. In 1986, the U.S. National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act and the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program eliminated liability for vaccine manufacturers. All true. Any company shrewd and connected enough to persuade the CDC to add their products to the schedule could cash in. Vaccination schedule rapidly expanded without anybody performing comprehensive safety analysis or testing the possible negative synergies from a battery of multiple early vaccinations. So again, we're starting to get into the complicated explanations for the very simple reason. I don't know. Maybe it's because it's a negative synergy between hitting them with a baseball bat and hitting them with a frying pan. Maybe it's the synergistic, multiple hits to the head are bad. And they can't seem to do the analysis yet. Nor did the public health regulators make any effort to perform a mass loading calculation of the combined mercury and aluminum exposures from so many new vaccines. So now we're going to get safe vaccines by reducing the adjuvants, by identifying the bad adjuvants, and never teaching basic biology 101. Having read Fraser's analysis, it seems strange to me that no one had previously connected the dots between the vaccine schedule and anaphylaxis crisis that preceded. No one had connected the dots before, except for this guy named Waylon James. He seems to have connected it in 1988. And Eustace Mullins also seems to have connected it in 1988. And then there's a whole flood of books that have nothing to do with reality that come after those books. And no one before Heather has ever connected this thing. Interesting. Those path-breaking vaccinologists quickly discovered that injecting an allergen directly into the bloodstream bypassing the digestive process often provokes anaphylaxis. Medical literature shows how powerful adjuvants added to vaccines in order to increase the immunological response also amplify the allergic response. Adjuvants promote allergic sensitization not just to vaccine antigens but also to other bystander proteins and allergens in the ambient environment at the time that the adjuvant vaccines are administered. Thus, a child vaccinated with aluminum adjuvants during a spring ragweed outbreak may develop a lifelong allergy to ragweed, peanut oil. Further, as noted by the LEAP study, once a child has developed allergies, there's a tendency to develop more. And of course, that would be because their hypersymbiosis with their bacteria in their gut and the phages that they produce is now totally off balance and probably no longer in sync, no longer effectively assisting the microbiome as you're supposed to by selecting for their phages and eliminating those of the competitors. It did not elude to me that the same pharmaceutical companies have transformed vaccination into a lucrative enterprise. And I invited Heather to give a presentation at the Broad Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Broad Institute, where people as diverse as Helena Chan and Kevin McKernan have all taken paychecks. A prestigious group of well-funded and experienced scientists gathered at MIT to find a way to turn off the allergic reaction by identifying genetic precursors to allergies. This is good, important work, but I wanted them to hear and understand Heather's story of the peanut allergy from a historical perspective, one that was supported by a rich library of medical literature. Using a series of vivid slides, Fraser clearly explained the provocative role of aluminum adjuvants, conjugate vaccine technology, and combination vaccines in the allergy explosion. Look at that complicated explanation for intramuscular injection of any combination of substances being dumb. They don't want you to know. And again, in case there was any chance that Heather Fraser's book was going to let you know, they needed to put a forward in front of it to make sure that they complicated it as much as possible. Fraser's presentation was strong and convincing, but it only raised mild interest among the scientists. They were not the least bit skeptical, but they explained to us, this is not what we do. Their expertise, they said, were human genes. Their expertise is human genes. When I questioned them, they acknowledged that the allergy epidemic must have been triggered by an environmental toxin and that their research was unlikely to identify the culprit. They told me that they did not need to know what caused the peanut allergy in order to find the treatment. I began thinking that refusal to look at the possible causal role of vaccines was like trying to find a genetic cause for sunburn without considering the role of the sun. What an interesting standpoint to take then. So what's the sun in this analogy? Too many vaccines? Vaccinating when your kid is sick? Or intramuscular injection is just plain dumb? Because I think that for all this time we have been herded into a trap where they were never going to say that intramuscular injection is dumb, but they're going to give you some mealy-mouthed explanation about how it's combination vaccines that are dumb. It is the accumulation of heavy metals that's dumb. Any one particular shot doesn't hurt people, even though they had a whole bus that they were touring around the United States that said these people had early, immediate onset symptoms that would never require a long-term placebo-controlled trial to establish as existing. And yet none of these people have promoted it yet. And in fact, here, he's kind of accentuating the longer-term side effects, the longer-term development of allergies and other things, instead of the immediate. And the immediate part would reveal that it's intramuscular injection of any combination of substances, not one particular one, not accumulation of it, even though that's probably a factor. I wanted to prevent a new generation of children from being pushed into the river in the first place. Their work is important, but these scientists were trying to save the children downstream. I wanted to prevent a new generation of children from being pushed into the river in the first place. But if he effectively does not see that hitting a kid in the head with any piece of metal or wood or any hard, heavy object is dumb, then we can do an awful lot of studies about whether a baseball bat is too hard to hit a kid with, or whether a dumbbell is too hard to hit a kid with, or maybe a set of wooden nunchucks is appropriate to hit a kid in the head with. And then we'll make a list of safe things that we can hit our kids in the head with. That's what this sounds like. Because he still doesn't seem to understand. Heather's book cracks the code? What's the crack? This is a Skyhorse book from 2017. Sorry for the abrupt cut there. I could use I could do this, but I didn't. I apologize for that. So that's 2017. They redo that one. Then in 2018, Moth and the Iron Lung comes out, and also this book by Tom Cowan, where he seems to know, I guess there's something wrong with vaccines or something like that. Then one of the better books that I think is out there comes out, which is this one by How to End the Autism Epidemic. I think this is one of those books that everybody should probably have. A lot of the studies in here are good. A lot of the arguments are good. I think chapter 4 is really nice. I can't say anything really bad about this book, so I don't know about J.B. Hanley or who he is. And this is Chelsea Green. So this is the same publishing company that published Tom Cowan's book. Then 3 Seconds to Midnight, that's Steve Hatfield's book, comes out in 2019. So this is really close to the start of the pandemic. Steve Hatfield has a book. And then it just starts, right? Then the list of books comes out. Anthony Fauci, the real Anthony Fauci, comes out in 2021. They basically use this to campaign to get Bobby on the White House ticket. And first, he's independent, and I think they really hoped that, like they told the story here, that the independent candidate would be absorbed as a vice president. They told that story in a book in 2008. The fake anti-vax movement in America, with their float in the parade and sitting on the throne, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and at his side are people like Meryl Nass and Mary Holland and Brian Hooker, are actually also supported by people like Robert Malone and Kevin McKernan and Andrew Wakefield and Polly Tommy, all of whom, even Stephen Bannon, will regularly promote CHD and Mary Holland, because it is all one fake anti-vax movement that was used to herd a bunch of people politically, to herd a bunch of cats into politically manipulating them into believing that Donald Trump and the Maha movement was something real. It's like faking your enthusiasm for NBA basketball. You know, you buy a bunch of shorts and you buy a bunch of shirts and you wear the stuff and you put little face paint on and you learn some stats and you start saying that the NBA is really great. But that's not being honest. You know the NBA hasn't been great for years. You know that they haven't been calling travels for years. You know that it's the same game, unfortunately. And so the next
pandemic of the entire world. But that's life.
And the audience laughs. So this gets worse, right? Because
when Secretary Kennedy asked me to do to answer the question, what is causing the rise in autism?
This is a guy who met me several times in person during the course of the pandemic. This is a guy who pleaded with me not to mention Robert Malone's name again, not mention anybody's name again, just teach the biology that he defers to me on because he's not sophisticated enough to understand it. Later, he sent me another text correcting that, saying that he doesn't agree with my biology. But when I interviewed him, he said that, you're the biologist. I defer to you. I'm just an economist. This guy is now allowed by the big show to talk to Dr. Drew in front of official White House signage. And this cannot be by accident. This will never be shown on mainstream media. This will probably only be shown to the people who social media wants it to see. But nonetheless, this is an extremely discrediting moment because not only is he talking to Dr. Drew, but Dr. Drew has regularly promoted the traitor Sasha Latipova, whose daughter played a very macabre character on the internet when she was a minor and was promoted on Alex Jones as soon as she became 18, as far as I can tell, after having threatened to kill the YouTube CEO. And sometime in the last few years, she made a video with her mom at a gun range about shooting the president for the white race. These are not things that have disappeared from the internet. These are things that are just conveniently ignored, that nobody seems to notice that Dr. Drew promotes somebody with such a macabre history of what can only be characterized as child abuse. She has her underage daughter on the internet faking a powder-based overdose before talking about sex. This is a terrible person who was promoted repeatedly on the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Defender podcast, repeatedly with podcasts by CHD with Meryl Nass and Polly Tommy as hosts. This woman was on stage with the traitor Robert Malone in 2023 in January in Sweden, talking about how it was the DOD, but we'd never really figure it out. And now Dr. Drew is talking to my friend, Jay Bhattacharya, the head of the National Institutes of Health. And this is supposed to be real. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has asked Jay Bhattacharya to figure out the autism epidemic, which I thought Heather Fraser had cracked the puzzle in 2010 in her original book that got republished by Skyhorse Publishing 7 years later. I thought she'd cracked the code. What do we need some economist? I was about to say something really rude there, but why do we need some economist from Stanford to be the head of the NIH if the guy doesn't even understand biology, defers to me as a biologist?
It's actually surprising how much can get done when there's the political will to do it, right? That's a question that has been very difficult to get scientists to actually address. I don't know the answer why autism.
I don't either, but I'd like to know. And by the way, I would also argue that there's been a political movement to suppress the question even, and it's amazing how much that can have an effect.
That actually didn't surprise me. I knew about
This is discrediting the United States. By allowing Dr. Drew to interview anyone of significance in front of a White House signage is just gross. I think Dr. Drew is like the epitome of what grifter means. I'll do any ad, I'll read any script, I'll look into any camera and say whatever you want to say, just put the money on the table. That's really who he is. And why is Jay Bhattacharya legitimizing this guy? Because he was told to. You think Jay Bhattacharya's best bet for getting his message out was to go to Dr. Drew, or do you think somebody told him that now you have a Dr. Drew interview?
about that. Yeah. What I didn't know was that when there's a political will to answer a question like this, it will happen.
Remember that when he was on stage with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about a week ago, he said that there was a decrease in life expectancy in America, but he had no explanation for it. Even though the explanation is right there, it starts with O and ends with D.
By September?
Well, we'll have a research program. Drew, you know, it takes what science takes its own time.
I know. Well, at least you have data analysis.
No,
you have some hypotheses.
We'll have a program, an independent research program where the nation's scientists
the code was cracked.
Bid for funding to study the program. We'll give data available to them so that they can analyze the links from of autism with environmental exposure, diet,
age of the parents,
genetic background. We're gonna have an all
age of the parents. Exactly what PBS NewsHour just told you a couple days ago. It can be that the dad's too old to have kids. Then you get this autism shit. You know, when the dad's real old, then you get a lot of autistic sperm.
All of the above approach.
Yeah, good.
And with no a priori thumb on the scale, you can't look at that.
Yeah, good.
And so we'll have an honest answer. I mean, it's hard to. As a scientist, I never say, okay, we know this in 2 days. Because 2 days from now, you say, well, where's the answer?
Of course.
But I think that we actually, for the first time in history, are really honestly asking the question. And
because I've been at a party or two with this guy and eaten tacos and drank beer next to him, I just can't take this seriously. I feel like more than anything right now, this just irks me because I know this is just a performance. There's no possible way after all the conversations that I've had with this guy that this is real. He can't possibly be the head of NIH. He's pretending to be. If the head of the NIH is more like the guy who dresses in the mouse suit at Chuck E. Cheese, then yes, he's the head of NIH. He's the guy you meet when you come in. He's the guy who gives you your menu and sits you down at the table, but that's it.
That's actually surprised me that when there's a political will to do that, you can actually get past the institutional desire to.
See, he said political will twice now. So he's been given a script of talking points that he's supposed to improvise through, and he's past the audition stage. So if his improvisation is shitty, oh, that's just the way it is. I mean, this is the actor you've got.
And not know the answer to a question.
Interesting. I can tell you my personal story. I spoke at lots of colleges and universities over the years, but one of them I would give a lecture to their incoming freshman class every year for about 15 years. And it's a very, very elite science institution. And I noticed I would give a lecture at the beginning, maybe 25 years ago when I started doing this. At the first couple seats in the front rows, I could say, "Oh, those kids I could see. I know what a spectrum is. And as the years went on, the rows started filling up. The next row, and it got so bad that institution got so bad.
He has been lecturing long enough to see the front row of intellectually disabled people increase over time. It's just gross, the kinds of stories these people will tell.
It got so prevalent that institution needed to set up a separate autism department and program for helping them manage whatever stressors or unique issues they had.
And whatever the answer is, it's almost like, there's such a range. It's likely be the case that the biology is going to be very different for the more
So you're putting your finger on this. This may not be people go, it's not a diagnosis. I thought to myself, it's not. It's a syndrome. And as such, yes, there's going to be a lot of different things in there. We're going to have to look at that too.
We'll tease it apart. I think we'll learn a lot more about it, and we'll get answers to parents and children of this country who have been desperate for answers for years.
I'm talking to Jenny McCarthy in a few weeks, and I want to apologize to her because she's looking for answers. And I was a little dismissive, and I thought, God, it's sexist, and it's like you can't let moms try to come up with some answers here.
Pretty remarkable. That's where we are. They still won't really tell you the truth about how criminal it was not to use antibiotics for pneumonia for a couple years, but the data's right there. They're never going to tell you that pure oxygen or misuse of ventilation can also lead to pneumonia that might need antibiotics, so if we don't treat it, it'll increase. Opioids, our head of NIH and head of HHS is unaware that more young people die of opioids than anything else under 40. do not resuscitate orders. This suicide story, I think, is a minimum thing. You know, I don't think there were that many suicides. I'm sure there were suicides, but they didn't contribute to the loss. They didn't contribute to hundreds, to, you know, thousands of deaths like opioids did. Death certificates can be faked for money, and they definitely did it. PCR is not a useful diagnostic tool, but it does create a remnant stream that's ideal for a human genome project that needs a never-ending stream of remnants. And remember, America is a country that still takes the foreskin of babies for fibroblasts and sells it, and sells cesarean section placentas for a lot more money than they do from regular births. Fighting about mandates is slave speak. You can't mandate hitting kids in the head and then argue about how many times you can hit them or how early you can hit them. Vaccines are a mythology because intramuscular injection is dumb. Autism is a mythology designed to hopefully make people never come to the conclusion that intramuscular injection is dumb. It's a complex thing of environmental and genetic causes. Gain of function is a mythology that wants to hide, or is intended to hide, the fact that the only thing the Human Genome Project has allowed us to do is make large quantities of pure DNA. And we can put that in places. When we do, sometimes proteins that aren't supposed to be there will show up. Sometimes immune responses will happen. Sometimes other changes will happen. Sometimes the cells that we put it in will repackage it. But that doesn't mean virology is real, and it definitely doesn't mean that gain of function is real. AI is a mythology that's really just computers and our naivety about what language is. Our naivety about how language can be used against us that people have known for generations. And AI is just a computer application of that. Don't think for a second that AI is about to wake up and take over. So we don't want to make poisoning kids a choice. We want to fight against poisoning kids. Intramuscular injection is dumb. We don't need to figure out what part of that is dumb. Intramuscular injection of anything is dumb. Autism complicates that. Make sure that you don't ever come to that conclusion by asking whether it was the heavy metals or the adjuvants or the conjugated proteins. And again, virology is just applications using synthetic DNA, which is the only thing that the Human Genome Project has really given us. And finally, language is an enchantment, so don't read language that you don't want to read. Don't scroll on social media reading language that you shouldn't be reading. Pick a book. Choose the language you read, because then you're choosing the thoughts that you think. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember this is for all the children of Earth. This is for the grandchildren, specifically RNA cannot pandemic. Intramuscular injection is dumb. Transfecting healthy people is a crime. And the population pyramid is a problem that they have been managing. Thank you very much for joining me. See you again tomorrow. Streak alive. Not gonna break. Bethel Park School's calling me again because the school got canceled today because we had too many trees down yesterday from the thing. Don't forget, we're learning about the background, and that's how we're going to dispel the myth. I hope everybody is aware we're doing the pattern integrity, a pie with a tat. What is it? It is a place where there's an interface between composition and decomposition. It is a place where hypersymbiosis exists, where there are endosymbionts and ectosymbionts, and they communicate. And that is what a life as a pie with a tat means. You can figure this out also by thinking about the fact that there are no diseases blamed on bacteriophages, but bacteriophages are free to pass most, if not all, barriers in your body. Mitochondria are endosymbionts that they might be communicating with, and more importantly, are antibodies, and Peyer's patches might be ways of selecting and promoting certain bacteria in our gut and working together with them. All of this magic world was probably known by Joshua Lederberg. He tried his best to leave it behind. Make sure you know mitochondria are endosymbionts. You can find that idea originally from Lynn Margulis. Look that up. And Peyer's patches versus rhizophagy is the subject of the next couple days. Hopefully I'll get the slides done. This is a hard subject to push, so forgive me if I do it less perfectly in the next couple days. Thanks for being here. I hope you're enjoying the biology coaching. Life is a pattern integrity with a trajectory across time. Thanks for being here. See you again tomorrow.